E-tolling. What is e-tolling? We don't really know much about it in the Cape. We don't have these great big gantries, these unsightly gantries polluting our motorways and our highways. But apparently it's flared up again, because listen to this. I'm just reading from a website here which says that plans to start e-tolling in Gauteng in the next 2 months do not upset the opposition to Urban Tolling Alliance, OUTA, and that's the chairman anyway. It doesn't upset the chairman, Wayne Duvenage, and that was according to him yesterday. He's in the Power Lunch Johannesburg studio now. Wayne, it's risen again, this thing. It's like the Eurozone crisis. It goes away for a while and then comes back. But before we get to the latest developments, just put it all into perspective for us. Tell us about e-tolling and your stance towards it.
Okay, so back in 2010, just after the World Cup, society here saw these gantries going up and were quite surprised at how government was going to fund the Gauteng freeway upgrade. And we've got nothing against the road upgrade. We need to have our road upgrades. It's just the funding mechanism. And they're trying to introduce a very cumbersome, very inefficient and extremely illogical process in raising funds through this electronic tolling system. And we've objected to it because, first of all, they didn't consult with society properly as it was required of them by the Constitution and PAJA. And it is extremely onerous and costly and inefficient. As we've said, there are very more efficient systems available to the government to raise funds from society. And we've got no objection to paying for the roads. We just don't need to be ripped off, because it's going to cost society about 1.5 billion rand a year just in the administration costs before you put that money onto the tarmac. That could be money that goes into the tarmac or into schools and clinics and so forth. So we objected. We interdicted e-tolling successfully this time last year, in April last year. That was set aside in September at the Constitutional Court appeal, and we're going through that legal process now. It will be heard in the latter part of this year in the Supreme Court of Appeal. So that's a sword that hangs over their head. Now, they've been trying to launch e-tolling, and this is the 6th time I think they're trying to launch it. The initial launch date was this time 2 years ago, April 2011. It's now April 2013. And they can't launch. And in the Constitutional Court last year, when they said they were going to launch, and they would launch within 2 weeks, they said they were ready, they needed the funds, they needed to ensure their ratings weren't impacted. But 7 months have gone past and they haven't launched. So again, it's just another step in the saga, I suppose.
Meanwhile, of course, the legal issue is going to cost the taxpayer money. But I noticed on commercial radio this morning, as I was driving into CNBC's Cape Town studios, there were advertisements for people to go and register, or whatever you need to do to become part of the e-tolling family. What you said, again, I'm reading for this website, Wayne, it says, it's been 7 months since the Constitutional Court set aside the initial interdict to allow SANRAL to start tolling, something they claim they could and would do within 2 weeks, as you've just said. So what's the latest news? I thought if the court said no, it's not constitutional, can't go ahead, why has it suddenly come up again?
Well, that's going to still be ruled yes or no in the Supreme Court later this year, whether it can or can't go ahead. Now, that ruling in September last year was just setting aside the interdict. It gave SANRAL the opportunity to start raising funds and start tolling, which they said they would do, as I said, within 2 weeks. But they still haven't done that. And as I said, 7 months have now passed. We believe that it's very difficult, it's very complicated, it's the biggest tolling system of its kind in the world, but trying to be forced into a society where it's easy to buy cloned number plates, where it's easy to run roughshod over the system, our e-natus systems are not accurate where they draw the information from, and so it is becoming very cumbersome. They've gone on a multi-million rand advertising and marketing campaign to get society to come on board, and society is clearly rejecting this. They've rejected it both in the consultation meetings. There were 3 of them last year in November that SANRAL and the Department of Transport had, and society attended those meetings and sent out a clear message of rejection. They also got over 11,000 postings and mailings in response to some of the information they required around the tariffs and around the exemption notices, also in November last year. So the message is very clear from society. We will not participate in something which you should have engaged with us properly in the first place in 2007, when they placed 1 advert in 6 newspapers and got only 28 responses from 3.5 million motorists. And that was the extent of their public engagement process. And the Constitution says you've got to do this properly and meaningfully, which they haven't done. So now to come to the public and say, come on board and buy into our program and buy into our plan to fund these roads in what we deem as a very evil, a very inefficient and a very irrational process, I think they're going to find it very hard. They cannot convince society. They're not going to come to the party. And this is ultimately what's going to bring the system down.
Irrational, you say, but what's the alternative? I mean, the fact is that roads do need to be maintained.
Yeah.
I mean, infrastructure is so important in a growing country like South Africa. What's your solution?
Well, absolutely, and we're not saying that we don't want to pay for the roads, and we're saying that we do need the roads. You know, societies, roads and infrastructures and networks have to be continuously upgraded to keep pace with the growing economy. We're saying that in existing, within the legislation, are very efficient mechanisms to raise funds. The fuel levy is one of them. You know that if government had to put 9 cents onto the fuel levy back in 2006 when the e-tolling plan was hatched, and this 5.7 billion rand that they put into the plan last year, we would have already paid 17 billion rand. Now that's the capital cost of this highway. That's how ludicrous the plan is. I mean, we could have already paid for that part of it. The fuel levy is the most equitable, most efficient user pays mechanism. Every time you or I fill our car up, we're putting about 100 rand into the fuel levy, which goes towards road infrastructure upgrading and construction. So, you know, it attracts zero administration costs, whereas e-tolling attracts 1.5 billion rand a year. Fuel levy has 100% compliance. E-tolling was not going to have anything more than 70% compliance. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. Why they don't want to go down this route, we don't know. We've asked the question several times. They keep saying they can't ring fence. What they can ring fence, they do ring fence the road accident fund and a lot of other areas. So really, we don't understand why would you want to subject society to a process that is very onerous when your role as government is to ensure that you reduce the negative impact of revenue collection on society in order to make society pay for these things. We want to pay, we just don't want to be ripped off.
I must admit, it does seem very, very elaborate to me. I mean, we've already got a fuel levy, but as you say, you can put another 9-10 cents on and that will pay for it. When I go to Johannesburg, which is fairly frequently, I look at these things and think this massive infrastructure has been put in place and there's no way that government can go back now because of the amount spent on putting those ghastly things in. Well,
those are a minor element in the whole cost. To say that the gantries are up and let's just go ahead and toll is wrong, because that's forever and a day tolling is going to happen. It is a small amount, less than 1 billion or so rand out of the 17, 18 or 19 billion rand that the road has cost us. We can also put those gantries to good use for traffic monitoring, for policing, for average distance speed trapping and so forth. So the gantries needn't be lost, that cost. It's not the big cost. The problem is, you know, if you have to pay off those gantries once off at 1 billion rand, it's better than paying 1.5 billion or 1.7 billion a year for the next forever and a day. That's what it's going to cost to administer this. So we're saying, you know, let's not be fooled by the fact that the gantries are up now. Tolling has to happen. It doesn't have to happen, and it shouldn't happen. And I don't think society is going to allow it to happen.